In sports, you have many iconic moments and great players who create them. A player like Tom Brady is remembered for years and by generations. But for every Brady, there's probably hundreds, maybe even thousands of other players that could have raised a Lombardi trophy had they had the chance. And this isn't just the NFL that this could be in. This is all sports in general. The haves and the have-nots. And NASCAR is no different in this respect, though it could be warped. While you have drivers like Jeff Gordon and Jimmy Johnson, where it seems like everything went right, there are tons and tons of other drivers who could have challenged or even beaten them in competition, yet they never were granted the chance. And while we may never know the names of all of these drivers, there are many drivers that we can ask what if about. Many of which were great, but could have been actually even better. So with that, let's look at them. Starting with our first pick on this list, a former driver of the number 1 car, Steve Park. Park was the first Cup driver full-time for Dale Earnhardt Incorporated, and he had tons of potential with the new team. While his numbers were not the greatest to start, his injury at Atlanta in 1998 basically shot his rookie campaign to hell. This also greatly hampered his 1999 season as well, but in 2000, he finally brought home a win, and in 2001, he got a win as well as a consistently top 10 first 2/3 of the season put together. Once again though, injury would hit him and take him down. And at this point, he would never be able to rebuild his career. Had Park not gotten injured, who knows how good it could have been. A more successful driver who still could have been more successful was actually the late David Pearson. Pearson is seen by many as possibly or is the best driver in NASCAR history. But it might surprise you to know that he never ran a full Cup schedule over the span of his career. Now, part of this could have been that he wasn't allowed in some states. We'll just leave that at that. Yet even with this, he still won 3 Cup titles. Had he completed a few more seasons, maybe he would be the 7-time champion instead of Richard Petty. And speaking of Petty, we need to look at Adam Petty. Petty was a young 4th-generation driver that seemed to be a surefire face for Petty's name in the 2000s. Racing for Petty Enterprises, he didn't run all that great in the Busch Series, but he did end up scoring 3 top 5s in 1999. While he was still only 19 years old, he made his first start at the Texas Motor Speedway. And at the time, a 19-year-old starting a Cup race was an alien concept. But before he could even make any major mark in NASCAR, through driving that is, he was killed in a practice crash at New Hampshire. While it's not sure that he would have really done anything in Cup, we'll never know, and he's definitely one of the biggest what-ifs in NASCAR history. Now, one driver who was sure to be a giant success was Davey Allison. Allison had won 18 races in the first 8 years of his career. From 1987 to 1992, he won 2 or more races a year. 91 and 92 were his breakout seasons with 5 wins apiece, and in 1992, he nearly won the Winston Cup. And while he wasn't going to win the 93 Cup, it didn't look like, he still was a top driver. Unfortunately, with his death in 1993 in a helicopter crash at Talladega, we will never know. At the age of 32, he probably had 10 to 12 years left in his career at a competitive level. Had he survived and kept his 2 wins per year average going, then he could have been around upwards of 40 to 50 career wins and be seen in the same light of success as Rusty Wallace or Tony Stewart. Now, one driver that we also can't properly judge at this point is Carl Edwards. Edwards was a driver who would compete with the best of the best. Edwards competed for the title in his first full season in 2005. In 2008 and 11, he also was beat by Jimmy Johnson and Tony Stewart in some of their most impressive championships. He scored as high as 9 wins in a season in 2008, and by the end of his career, he had 28 career wins. His final Cup start was at Homestead in 2016, where he crashed out while trying to compete for yet another championship. The way that he quickly left the sport and the fact that JGR equipment had won 2 of the next 4 championships afterwards left many asking, what would happen if he had stayed? The only driver who has lost championships in more heartbreaking ways than Edwards would have to be that of Mark Martin. Martin finished second in points 5 times in his career. In 1990, he lost the championship by 26 points, and he was penalized 46 points earlier in the season. An absolute gut punch. In 94, he was destroyed by Dale Earnhardt. In 1998, Jeff Gordon had to run one of the best seasons in NASCAR history to beat him. In 2002, he ended up basically choking away the championship at the end of the season and giving it to Tony Stewart. And in 2009, he was the bridesmaid to Jimmy Johnson in the 4th year of his 5 consecutive titles. One has to ask how his legacy would be shaped had he won at least one of those championships. Now, a more tragic story is that of Tim Richmond. Richmond was more or less the first partying playboy in NASCAR. While driving okay in '81, he began winning from 1982 to the mid-'80s. But his biggest explosion of success would be in 1986, where he won 7 of the 29 races and finished 3rd in points. The next year, he won 2 of the 8 races he participated in. The reason that he missed most of the season, though, was because he was suffering a battle with AIDS. This ultimately ended up ending his life in 1989 at the young age of 34. Had he raced into the 1990s with more durable and stable Hendrick equipment, who knows what he could have accomplished. Maybe Earnhardt wouldn't have 7 championships. Maybe Gordon wouldn't have 4. Now, we covered Adam Petty earlier, but another Petty who could have done more was Lee Petty. Many look at his son Richard, and rightfully so, but they look at him as one of the best ever. But at the time of this video, Lee Petty sits 12th on the all-time Cups wins list with 54 victories. He was part of the initial drivers to set the standard for the early years of NASCAR. From NASCAR's start in 1949 through to 1960, he never finished below 6th in the points. So heading into 1961, he was still only 47 years old and a contender for the title. This all ended at the Daytona Duels when he had a career-ending crash. With 3 titles, he is one of the best ever, but he could have been even greater. Another old-school driver who could have been even better was Curtis Turner. Curtis Pops Turner. Turner was a great driver who had no care for titles or major accolades. He just went out to win and give it his all and just have fun. He became NASCAR's most popular driver due to this and his freewheeling, partying personality. So I take back my Tim Richmond Playboy comment. Turner was NASCAR's first partying Playboy. But because of him starting a union, Big Bill France, the man who was the head man of NASCAR at the time, kicked him out for 4 years. And while he was eventually let back in, who knows how much damage this did to his legacy over this ban time. Many can make an argument that had he not been both slandered and missed those 4 years, his legacy could have been one of the best in sports history. Another outlier driver was Alan Kulwicki. Like Frank Sinatra, he did it his way, and slowly but surely he built up his team from nothing to a low-end top 10 organization by 1990 and 1991. In 1992, the seas parted for him to finally take home a championship. And while at 38 years old he wasn't younger, he still had a few competitive years left in him. But in 1993, he was killed in a plane crash on the way to Bristol. Had he not been killed, who knows what accomplishments he could have achieved in both his driving career and his ownership career. Now, one driver who stopped his driving career at the peak of his career was gentleman Ned Jarrett. Jarrett had really become one of the best drivers in NASCAR, quicker than the Thanos snap. In the 7 years from 1959 to 1965, he won 50 races, with 15 coming in 1964 and 13 coming in 1965. This, on top of championships in 1961 and 1965, really had made him become the premier driver of the early 60s. Yet at 34 years old, at the top of his game, he retired. Had he raced another 10 to 15 years, he could have ended his career ahead of David Pearson and the King. Yes, Ned Jarrett could have had the most wins in NASCAR history. Now, Ernie Irvan was another driver who could have really made a bigger mark on the sport as well. Irvan's career built up to a peak in 1994, getting more and more wins each season. 20 races into 1994, he was locked in a dead heat duel with Dale Earnhardt for the championship. That was until his car slammed into the wall at Michigan due to a tire failure. His major injuries rendered him with a 10% chance of survival, and while a miracle was in occurrence when he lived, he was never the same driver again. So it's right to ask, what if he never got hurt? Another driver whose career was derailed by injuries was that of Dale Earnhardt Jr. Jr. was one of the most hit-or-miss drivers in the new millennium, but he still scored 26 career wins. What is amazing as well as kind of sad is that he did this while suffering from dozens of concussions. These derailed his 2012 and 2016 seasons, but also, for what we know, hampered his 2002, 2003, and 2014 seasons as well, as whatever ones he hasn't confirmed at this point. On top of this, who knows what effect his father's death could have had on him at the time. For these reasons, Dale Jr. really is one of the biggest what-if drivers in NASCAR history. Now, the last driver on this list has probably the biggest impact and is the biggest what-if driver ever. Dale Sr. Dale Earnhardt was having a return to form before 2001 and looked to have a new lease on life. After finishing second in points in 2000, this was only bolstered. Had he survived the 2001 500, there is a very real chance that he wins his 8th championship before his retirement. But on the flip side, there would not have been the rapid furthering of safety measurements that were in place after his death. If this hadn't happened, there would have certainly been more injuries and more than likely more deaths of drivers before the measurements that we see today of safety were to be put in place. Both good and bad, there are infinite scenarios as to what would happen had Dale Earnhardt survived the 2001 Daytona 500. And with that, I want to pass this idea on to you. Who do you think is the biggest what-if drivers of NASCAR's history? Let me know down in the comments below. And while you're at it, leave a like on this video, share this video, and subscribe to my channel for more great NASCAR content. Until next time, have a good one.